What were my immediate thoughts after watching this movie? Well, this dude has extremely long legs and a skinny body, he somehow has the ability to travel to the underworld, and he seems to have a similar looking dog to Zero. So Jack Skellington is Victor Van Dort after he ages several years to his death in the mid-1900s, at which point the Land of the Dead has converted into Halloween Town, and he becomes known as Jack Skellington the Pumpkin King. At least that's what my theory was going to be about until I saw that hundreds of others have also thought of that. So today, how about I focus on something rarely touched upon, Emily's last scene. Hello, I'm the Theorizer, and wow, after I revealed that I've hardly watched any Disney movies, the backlash was real. So I decided to still hold off on Disney, and instead, finally watch the movie that I've been waiting to for a decade, The Corpse Bride. If you've watched it, then good, because you're ready for my theory. So, at the end of the movie, Emily has ascended from the Land of the Dead back onto Earth. And once Lord Barkis gets what he deserved, Emily turns into the same kind of butterflies that surrounded Victor for years. She then ascends upwards into the moon. Side note, I yet again ask the question, what the heck is it with Laika and moons? These lunar lunatics are hinting towards something more sinister in the lore of their movies, but that's not the point. The thing is, Emily leaves, but where does she go? Before I talk about my thoughts on her true death, I don't know if you two may have thought of all this or if it's all obvious, but none of that matters because this video is more of an analysis and I'm still going to analyze this as thoroughly as I possibly can. You see, most people who watch this movie assume that when people die in the movie, they go to the Land of the Dead. After all, it is called the Land of the Dead, but let's take a better look at it. When you go there, you don't turn into a soul or anything, but instead you remain as a corpse or skeleton. This matches the description of something else entirely. Not hell, not heaven, not a place where you're entirely deceased. I'm referring, of course, to purgatory. Limbo, the underworld, whatever you want to call it. A place known all throughout Christianity, Catholicism, Greek mythology, and most other religions. A place which, according to almost all of these belief systems, souls go to be cleansed before heaven or hell. If you watched my video on Supernatural, then you'll know all about it. But purgatory is crucial to this theory because it explains most of this movie's plot. I'm certain that almost everybody who watched the movie automatically believed that the Land of the Dead was the end-all be-all of this movie's lore, but it's not. And for all of you confused by the ending, I will now explain everything I've thought of. If a person dies, they cannot come back to life. It's against the fundamental laws of nature. So then how exactly did they do this in The Corpse Bride? Well, it's simple, really. In the Land of the Dead, the inhabitants aren't souls. They're just life attached to dead bodies. This is why they can still maneuver the land of the living with the usage of a simple book and spell. The spell talks about how you can access the living world by haunting, which is precisely what Victor and Emily do. And you've probably heard of ghosts and demons and haunting and whatnot, but paranormal haunting is something associated with purgatory. In most renditions I've seen in movies and TV, those in purgatory have access to haunting. In television shows such as Once Upon a Time, the underworld has a phone booth that allows communication to the land of the living. And honestly, think about it. If your soul is far out in the reaches of the aether or the nether, it's far less likely to be able to communicate. Purgatory, on the other hand, is between life and death. And even though I'm not heavily religious, I'm also not an atheist, and it all still intrigues me, especially when it's involved in a great movie like this. So is there more ties to purgatory? The answer is yes. When we take a good look at the Land of the Dead in this movie, we see skeletons and corpses scattered throughout the world. Skeletons, especially in conceptual pieces of art, tend to be heavily associated with the terror and macabre of purgatory. According to most religions, heaven and hell are more focused on the souls and complete death, rather than the partial death, as partial death is the focus of purgatory. Something that bugged the hell out of me in this movie was the fact that there were bugs in hell. I became rather confused. They claimed that this was a land for the dead, but They have maggots and black widows living peacefully in here. They are not dead at all. And what about Victor? He can travel here without any problems at all. This all proves that it cannot be a place of complete death, but rather a place of partial death. The underworld, limbo, purgatory. And this finally makes sense of the ending. Emily turns into butterflies and ascends towards the moon. A better place. It would make no sense for her to return to the underworld in this fashion. And the big reason I made this theory today is that the underworld is a place for people with unfinished business. A place where they can wait until they complete what they couldn't as they were living. Let's quickly recap Emily's life. She grew up and a man came into town who attempted to marry into her riches. Once he got what he wanted, he found her waiting near a tree and he killed her. As she died, she waited and waited for the marriage to follow through, only to keep waiting. When Victor approached and put a ring on it, she finally married. Her unfinished business. It was half done, and all that was left was to give Lord Barkis the same punishment she received. Purgatory. And by the end of the movie, Emily's unfinished business of sending her nemesis to the underworld was a success, which is why she was allowed to move on to a better place, what can only be called a paradisal state of being. Heaven. You know, it really makes me want to theorize on how Kubo and the Two Strings is tied in. It makes you wonder if the Moon Kingdom, ruled by the Moon King, really is heaven. But that's spooky, and for another day. Alright, so that was my theory on the corpse bride. But as I watched the movie, I wrote down a few extra notes relating to The Nightmare Before Christmas, and here they are. When I first began watching The Corpse Bride, I looked at what Victor did to Emily, and I began to think some really insane things. His name is Victor, like that of Victor Frankenstein, also someone who raised the dead. It also makes me really think about how Victor's likely to be Jack Skellington. In the underworld at first, everybody saw Victor and thought he was dead. He clearly has some sort of tie to the land of the dead for the fact that he can so easily go there when no other living person can. And how exactly did he pull Emily from her grave? He just said some vows and put a ring on it, but that somehow rips her from purgatory? It makes you wonder if Victor has powers that relate to the dead, powers that allow him to exist in their world and temporarily give resurrection. And I haven't seen Paranorman, but that sounds eerily similar to the plot of that movie, which, unlike The Nightmare Before Christmas, is by the same company who made The Corpse Bride. And we never did know exactly why Jack Skellington was feared in Halloween Town. How did he become their king? Unless he has powers of some sort that let him do so. I don't know. The timing for Paranorman doesn't match up for this mini theory of mine, and it doesn't entirely fit, but it's still so cool.
And more. Serendipity brought us together, and no force on earth.
So those were my theories on The Corpse Bride.